Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be the type of person to get into a property dispute with my HOA, but here we are. When I bought my house 6 months ago, I thought I'd found the perfect place to settle down and work from home in peace. The neighborhood looked like something out of a magazine. Perfectly manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and houses that all seemed to follow the same tasteful design guidelines. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was just how tightly controlled everything was by the neighborhood's HOA. Every blade of grass seemed to be regulated, and I quickly learned that the woman running the show was someone everyone just called the HOA president. She was in her late 50s, had lived there for over 2 decades, and treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. I'd seen her around in her golf cart, clipboard always in hand, inspecting properties and taking notes. The previous homeowner had warned me that she could be a bit intense, but I figured as long as I kept my lawn neat and didn't paint my house hot pink, I'd be fine. How wrong I was. The house I bought had something unique that initially attracted me to it, a slightly larger lot that backed up to a small wooded area. It gave me more privacy than the other houses, which all seemed to be built practically on top of each other. There was also this strip of land along the side of my property that was about 15 feet wide, running from the front yard all the way to the back. It had always just looked like an extension of my neighbor's yard to me. When I was going through the buying process, my real estate lawyer had pointed out something interesting on the survey. He mentioned that my property line actually extended quite a bit further than I might think, including that entire 15-foot strip that ran along my neighbor's prize-winning rose garden. He suggested I might want to clarify the boundaries with my neighbor at some point to avoid any confusion, but I was so focused on moving in and getting settled that I just filed the paperwork away and forgot about it. For the first few months, everything was peaceful. I worked from home doing graphic design, kept to myself, and slowly got to know the neighbors. The HOA president lived right next door, and I noticed she had this absolutely stunning English rose garden that she clearly spent hours tending. She seemed to have a routine where she'd walk along that side strip of my property to access different parts of her garden without having to go through her house. The trouble started when I decided I wanted to grow my own vegetables. After months of working inside all the time, I was craving a project that would get me outdoors and maybe save some money on groceries. I surveyed my yard looking for the best spot, somewhere with good sun exposure and easy access for watering. The perfect location turned out to be that 15-foot strip along the side. It got morning and afternoon sun, was close to my outdoor spigot, and would be easy to maintain. I started planning out where I'd put some raised beds and maybe a small greenhouse. One Saturday morning, I was outside measuring the area and laying down landscape fabric when I heard someone clearing their throat very loudly behind me. I turned around to see my neighbor marching toward me with a look of absolute outrage on her face. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing, digging up HOA common property without permission. I was confused because I hadn't been digging anything up, just measuring and planning. I tried to explain that I was just preparing to put in a vegetable garden on what I believed was my property. She actually laughed at me, like I'd said something ridiculous. She told me she'd lived there for 25 years and that path had always been there as common access. The previous owner apparently had understood that perfectly well. She said there was no way I owned that land. I offered to show her the survey I'd gotten when I bought the house, thinking this was just a simple misunderstanding that could be cleared up quickly, but she waved her hand dismissively and said she didn't need to see any fake paperwork. As the HOA president, she knew all the boundaries in the neighborhood. She gave me 24 hours to remove what she called my mess and restore the grass, or I'd get a formal violation and fine. I stood there watching her walk away, completely stunned. I'd tried to be reasonable and offer proof, but she'd refused to even look at it. That evening, I dug out my deed and survey map to double-check what I already knew. That land was definitely mine. Sure enough, the next morning there was a violation notice taped to my front door. It cited me for destruction of common area property and included a $200 fine. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't destroyed anything, and the land wasn't common area. I decided to escalate this properly. I scanned copies of my deed and survey map and sent a polite but firm message to the entire HOA board, not just the president. I attached the official documents and explained that since the land was my private property, the violation and fine were baseless and needed to be rescinded immediately. Instead of backing down, things got worse. The president apparently called an emergency board meeting and convinced the other members that I was some arrogant newcomer trying to steal community land with doctored documents. They sent me an even more aggressive response, rejecting my evidence and demanding payment of the fine. They warned that if I didn't comply, they'd put a lien on my property. At this point, I realized I was dealing with someone who was either completely delusional about property boundaries or so used to getting her way that she couldn't handle being challenged. Either way, I wasn't about to pay a fine for using my own land. I continued working on my garden preparation, figuring that eventually common sense would prevail. I was wrong about that too. A few days later, I was outside laying out where my raised beds would go when a police car pulled up. The HOA president was right behind the officer, pointing at me and talking animatedly. I could hear her telling him that I was trespassing on HOA property and vandalizing community land despite repeated warnings to stop. I took a deep breath and reminded myself to stay calm. When the officer approached me, I greeted him politely and explained that this seemed to be a civil disagreement about property lines, but I had documentation that could clear everything up. I went inside and got my original deed and the large official survey map. These weren't copies or scans, these were the actual documents with official seals and notarizations. I handed them to the officer and watched as he examined them carefully. The officer looked at the documents, then at the physical property, then back at the documents. He walked over to where property markers should be and compared what he saw to what was on the survey. After a few minutes, he turned to the HOA president with a completely different expression than when he'd arrived. He told her plainly that according to the legal deed and survey map, the land belonged to me. This was a civil matter, not a criminal one, and there was no crime being committed. He asked her not to use police resources for HOA disputes in the future. Then he handed my documents back to me, nodded professionally, and left. The HOA president stood there on the sidewalk looking absolutely humiliated. Several neighbors had come out to watch the commotion, and now they'd all seen her get shut down by the police. I thought maybe this would finally be the end of it. I was wrong again. About a week later, I got another official notice from the HOA this time. Instead of claiming I was trespassing, they'd found a different angle of attack. They cited something called Bylaw 12, Section 4, which apparently required all residential lots to be fully enclosed by continuous fencing. All fencing plans had to be submitted to and approved by their architectural review committee. The notice gave me 60 days to erect a fence enclosing my entire property, front, sides, and back. Most houses in the neighborhood, including mine, only had partial fencing in the backyard. This was clearly meant as punishment, forcing me to spend thousands of dollars on an expensive project I didn't want or need. But as I read through the notice and the specific bylaw they'd cited, I started to smile. They'd just handed me the perfect opportunity for what I can only describe as malicious compliance. I spent the weekend researching fencing options and studying the HOA-owned design guidelines. Then I drafted a cheerful response to the board, thanking them for bringing my property's non-compliance to my attention. I assured them I took the community's bylaws very seriously and would rectify the situation immediately. I attached a detailed fencing proposal for their approval, as required by the rules. The design I chose was a beautiful 6-foot privacy fence in a style that was explicitly listed as pre-approved in their own guidelines. I used my graphic design skills to create a professional diagram showing exactly where the fence would be installed, running precisely along my legal property line as shown on the survey. This meant the fence would run the full length of that 15-foot strip, effectively walling off the HOA president's convenient access to her rose garden forever. When the review committee met to consider my proposal, I could imagine the president's face as she realized what I was doing. She was completely trapped. The fence style was pre-approved, so they couldn't reject it on aesthetic grounds. The placement was on my legal property, which had been confirmed by the police incident and my documented evidence. If they denied the application, they'd be acting in bad faith and opening themselves up to a lawsuit they couldn't possibly win. With what I imagined were gritted teeth, the board stamped my proposal as approved. The fence installation took 2 weeks. It was noisy, disruptive work that happened right next to the president's peaceful garden sanctuary. I made sure to be out there every day, supervising the work and making friendly conversation with the crew. Each post that went in was another nail in the coffin of her convenient little pathway. When the fence was finally complete, the result was even better than I'd hoped. It was a beautiful, solid wooden barrier that perfectly defined my property boundaries. Behind it, I had complete privacy to work on my vegetable garden without anyone being able to see or comment on what I was doing. The impact on my neighbor was immediate and obvious. Her easy access to different parts of her garden was gone forever. Now, to tend to her roses, she had to walk all the way around her house instead of cutting through what she'd mistakenly thought was her personal pathway. Her view from the garden, which used to look out over an open grassy area, was now blocked by 6 feet of solid wood just 2 feet from her prize roses. The neighborhood's reaction was interesting to watch. Some neighbors gave me subtle thumbs ups when they thought no one was looking. Others seemed to realize that the HOA president wasn't quite as all-powerful as they'd believed. Her authority had taken a visible hit, and there was now a permanent physical reminder of her overreach that everyone could see every day. As for me, I was finally able to create the garden I'd wanted from the beginning. Behind my new fence, on the land I'd been forced to defend, I installed raised beds, a small greenhouse, and even a comfortable bench where I could sit and enjoy my work. The strip of land that had caused so much trouble was now a beautiful and functional part of my yard. The best part was the privacy. I could work in my garden, have friends over for barbecues, or just sit outside with a book without feeling like I was being watched and judged. The fence that the HOA president had forced me to build through her punitive bylaw enforcement had given me something I hadn't even known I wanted. Sometimes in the evenings, when I was watering my vegetables or just sitting on my bench, I could hear her on the other side of the fence. She'd mutter complaints as she took the long way around to reach her garden, clearly frustrated by the inconvenience she'd created for herself. I learned a lot from this whole experience. Sometimes when people refuse to listen to reason, you have to find other ways to make your point. The HOA president was so determined to control what I did with my own property that she gave me the perfect tool to ensure my privacy forever. Looking back, I almost have to thank her. If she'd just accepted the survey documents I'd offered to show her in the beginning, we could have worked out some kind of arrangement. Maybe I would have been willing to let her continue using that pathway in exchange for helping maintain it. But her refusal to acknowledge facts and her attempts to bully me into submission had made that impossible. Now, 6 months later, my garden is thriving. I've got tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and even some strawberry plants. The greenhouse extends my growing season, and the whole setup has turned into a hobby I genuinely love. My grocery bills have gone down, and I spend more time outdoors than I have in years. The HOA president and I maintain a polite but distant relationship now. She nods when we see each other getting mail, but we don't have conversations. I think she's learned that not everyone in the neighborhood is going to bow to her authority without question, especially when that authority exceeds its legal bounds. The fence stands as a monument to the whole saga. Every morning when I look out my kitchen window, I see that beautiful wooden barrier and remember how someone's refusal to accept documented facts led to the perfect example of unintended consequences. I've heard through neighborhood gossip that the HOA has been more careful about enforcing their bylaws since this incident. Apparently, other residents have started asking to see the specific rules being cited and requesting documentation of violations. The president's word alone is no longer sufficient authority. As I sit here now, writing this story while looking out at my garden through the window, I can't help but smile. Sometimes the best victories are the ones where your opponents defeat themselves through their own actions. The fence I was forced to build became the gift that keeps on giving. Privacy, property security, and a daily reminder that standing up for yourself is always worth it. The whole experience taught me that documentation is everything in property disputes. Having that original deed and survey map made all the difference when push came to shove. It also showed me that sometimes the best response to unreasonable people isn't to argue or get angry. It's to use their own rules against them in ways they never saw coming. My vegetable garden is producing more than I can eat now, so I've started sharing with some of the other neighbors. It's funny how a dispute that started with someone trying to control my land ended up bringing me closer to the community, just not in the way the HOA president had intended. The bench in my garden has become my favorite spot in the house. It's where I have my morning coffee, where I work on design projects when the weather's nice, and where I sit in the evenings planning what to plant next season. It's peaceful, private, and completely mine, protected by a fence that someone else forced me to build. Every time I hear footsteps on the other side of the fence taking the long way around, I'm reminded of how this all started with someone who couldn't accept that their assumptions about property boundaries were wrong. Their refusal to look at legal documents and their attempts to use authority they didn't actually have led to a permanent change that benefits me every single day. The story has become something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents get told about the fence incident as part of their informal orientation to local politics. It serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of understanding property boundaries and the limits of HOA authority. I've since become more involved in the HOA myself, attending meetings and making sure the rules are applied fairly and consistently. I've found that having someone ask questions and request documentation has made the whole organization more transparent and accountable. The president still runs her rose garden with the same dedication as before, but now she has to plan her gardening routes more carefully. I occasionally see her admiring my vegetables over the fence, and I wonder if she ever thinks about how different things could have been if she'd just looked at those survey documents when I first offered to show them to her. But that's the thing about consequences. Once set in motion, they have their own momentum. The fence that was meant to punish me became the solution to a problem I didn't even know I had. Privacy, security, and peace of mind, all delivered through the malicious compliance with rules that were never meant to be enforced fairly in the first place. As another growing season approaches, I'm planning to expand my garden even more. Maybe add some fruit trees along the back fence line, or install a small water feature near the bench. The possibilities are endless when you have clearly defined, legally protected space that's truly your own. The whole experience has made me a more confident homeowner and a better neighbor to the people who deserve it. I've learned that sometimes standing your ground isn't about being confrontational. It's about being prepared, staying calm, and using the system's own rules to protect your rights. And every morning when I look out at that fence, I remember that the best victories are often the ones where justice serves itself. Update. 1 year later, I thought the fence saga was over, but boy was I wrong. The past year has brought some developments I never could have predicted, and the whole situation has evolved in ways that are honestly better than I could have imagined. About 3 months after my fence went up, I started noticing some interesting changes in the neighborhood dynamics. It turned out that my little property dispute had opened the floodgates for other residents who had been quietly dealing with HOA overreach for years. The first person to reach out was my neighbor 2 houses down. He mentioned that he'd been following my situation and wanted to know how I'd handled the documentation side of things. Turns out he'd been getting violation notices for his vegetable garden in his backyard, which the HOA claimed violated some aesthetic guidelines. After seeing how I'd used official documents to shut down the president's claims, he decided to dig into his own property rights. Within a month, 3 other homeowners had contacted me for advice on various HOA disputes. One was being harassed about the color of her mailbox, another was fighting a demand to remove a bird feeder, and a third was dealing with complaints about his work truck being parked in his own driveway. All of them had started asking the HOA to provide specific documentation of the rules being violated and proof of the association's authority to enforce them. The HOA president was clearly not happy about this new trend of residents actually questioning her authority. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that board meetings had become much more contentious, with people showing up to challenge decisions and demand transparency. But the real bombshell came about 6 months after my fence installation. Another neighbor, who worked as a paralegal, had started researching the HOA legal structure after getting inspired by my property boundary victory. What she discovered was absolutely incredible. It turned out that the HOA incorporation had lapsed 3 years earlier due to unpaid state filing fees. Technically, the association had no legal authority to enforce anything because it wasn't even a legally recognized entity. The president had apparently been either unaware of this or hoping nobody would notice. When this information came to light at a neighborhood meeting, the fallout was spectacular. Years of fines, violations, and harassment had all been issued by an organization that had no legal standing. Several residents immediately demanded refunds of fines they'd paid over the past 3 years. The president tried to maintain control by claiming it was just a paperwork error that could be easily fixed, but the damage was done. A group of residents, including myself, formed an interim committee to research whether the neighborhood even wanted to continue having an HOA. Over the next few months, we conducted surveys and held open forums to discuss the future of neighborhood governance. The results were eye-opening. While most people appreciated having some basic standards for property maintenance, the vast majority were fed up with the micromanagement and arbitrary enforcement that had characterized the previous administration. We ultimately decided to reincorporate as a much more limited homeowners association with clearly defined boundaries on its authority. The new bylaws we drafted specifically protected property owners' rights to use their land as they saw fit, within reasonable limits. The days of violations for mailbox colors and bird feeders were officially over. The election for the new board was held last month, and I'm proud to say that none of the old power-hungry members were re-elected. The former president didn't even run, apparently having moved to another state to live closer to her daughter. I heard she sold her house quickly and at a price below market value, possibly to avoid dealing with the legal fallout from the years of invalid fines. As for me, I ended up being elected to the new board as the Director of Property Rights and Documentation. My job is essentially to make sure we never again have situations where residents are harassed based on incorrect assumptions about property boundaries or invalid authority. My garden has become something of a neighborhood showcase. People regularly stop by to ask for gardening advice, and I've started hosting informal workshops on weekend mornings. The space that was once a source of conflict has become a gathering place that brings people together. The fence itself has aged beautifully, and now has climbing roses growing along parts of it, ironically creating a more beautiful garden border than the open space that was there before. Several neighbors have complimented me on how well it defines the property lines and have asked for recommendations for their own fencing projects. I've also discovered an unexpected side benefit of the whole experience. My story has spread beyond just our neighborhood, and I've been contacted by homeowners in other areas dealing with similar HOA overreach. I've become something of an informal consultant, helping people understand their property rights and how to research their HOA legal authority. One particularly satisfying case involved a family being harassed about their vegetable garden by an HOA president who claimed gardening violated community aesthetic standards. After helping them research their state's right to garden laws and their property deed restrictions, they not only got the harassment stopped, but also got their HOA to officially recognize gardening as a protected property use. The documentation skills I developed during my own dispute have proven invaluable. I've learned that most HOA overreach happens because residents don't know their rights and don't demand proof of the association's authority. Once people start asking for documentation and researching the actual rules, a lot of these petty dictatorships crumble pretty quickly. My relationship with the former president's replacement in the neighborhood has been interesting to watch develop. The new owners of her house are a young couple with kids who absolutely love having a vegetable garden next door. Their children often peek through the fence gaps to watch me work, and I've given them their own small section to plant flowers in. The kids have no idea about the property dispute that led to the fence being built. To them, it's just a natural part of the landscape. Sometimes I think about how different their experience of the neighborhood is compared to what it was like under the old HOA regime, and I'm glad I played a part in making that change possible. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized that standing up to that one unreasonable demand created ripple effects that benefited the entire community. What started as a simple desire to grow vegetables turned into a complete restructuring of how our neighborhood governance works. The fence still stands as a reminder of the whole saga, but now it represents something bigger than just a property boundary dispute. It's become a symbol of the importance of knowing your rights, demanding accountability from authorities, and not backing down when you know you're right. My vegetable garden now supplies produce for several neighborhood families, and we've started a small seed exchange program. The space that was once a source of conflict has become a source of community connection and shared abundance. The bench where I sit in the evenings has been joined by a small table where neighbors sometimes stop by for impromptu conversations about gardening, property rights, or just life in general. It's become exactly the kind of peaceful, private space I'd hoped for when I first moved in, but with the added benefit of being a place where the community can come together. As I finish writing this update, I can hear children playing in the yard next door, and I know they're growing up in a neighborhood where property rights are respected and arbitrary authority is questioned. That might be the best outcome of all from what started as a simple misunderstanding about a property line. The fence that was meant to punish me became the foundation for positive change that's still rippling through our community. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones that create space for other people to succeed too. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Back in college, I shared an apartment with a roommate. We had a pretty normal setup. We shared a fridge, labeled the important stuff, and generally didn't care if the other person used a bit of milk or grabbed a slice of pizza now and then. It was chill, friendly, and cooperative. That all changed when she got a boyfriend. Suddenly, she got really controlling and weird about the fridge and her stuff. She labeled her stuff with her name, even down to the ketchup and mustard. She started taping notes like, "Do not touch" on things she had never cared about before. Her explanation was that she just don't want any of her stuff touched while my boyfriend is here. You understand, right? I didn't, but I wasn't going to argue. I figured, fine, she wants to draw a hard line. I'll play by the rules. Then, one day, she cooked this huge batch of chicken Alfredo for her boyfriend. She made a big show of it, plating it all cute, seasoning it carefully, saying, "He's gonna love it." She packed the leftovers into a plastic Tupperware container, wrote "Do not touch" in huge letters on the lid, then sealed it shut with actual clear tape, all the way around. Then she stuck it straight into the fridge while it was still steaming hot. Anyone who knows even the basics of food safety knows you're supposed to let food cool down before putting it in the fridge, otherwise it traps the heat and breeds bacteria. But I said nothing. I didn't touch it, didn't warn her, didn't even move it. I just watched. By the second day, while she was at his place, the container was fogged up on the inside and you could see condensation dripping off the lid. The smell started creeping out every time the fridge opened. A mix of sour dairy and something vaguely chickeny. By the third day, it was disgusting. The sauce had separated. The chicken looked off. The whole container had turned into a little science experiment, but it still had her warning on it. Do not touch. And I was happy to comply. Later that day, I came home to yelling. Apparently her boyfriend had opened it to reheat some and nearly threw up. The sauce had curdled, the chicken was gray, and the smell filled the whole apartment. She was furious and asked me why I hadn't told her it had gone bad. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You told me not to touch it. I figured you had it under control." She never labeled anything again after that. Not one single thing. The next one is an entitled people story. Okay, this is sort of confusing to follow, so let me try to explain the title. My sister has been friends with two girls and their brother since middle school, and when this happened, they were in their late 20s. The child in the title is the daughter of the brother. The brother is in prison at this time. His daughter is 2 or 3. The little girl comes to my mom's house sometimes when her aunts visit with my sister. My sister and these girls refer to each other as sisters. It's really more playful, but also a way to describe their closeness. The mother of these girls knows my mom through her daughters, but they've probably had 2 or 3 hi and bye type conversations. Around 5 a.m., my mother receives a phone call from an unknown number. Due to the time, she's nervous that it could be an emergency, so she answers. The mother of my sister's friends is on the phone. Here is my best recollection of the call as told from my mom. Mom: hello? Who is this? Friend's mom: hey, it's B, friend's mom. Mom, confused: oh, how you doing? Friend's mom: well, I'm trying to get with you so we can figure some things out for granddaughter's name. Mom: huh? Is she okay? Friend's mom: her mom is having a rough time since son's name went to jail, so you and I need to figure out what to do about daycare. Mom: daycare? Daycare for who? Friend's mom: for granddaughter's name. I told her mama not to worry about it because I would get with her other grandma to figure it out. Mom: I can't watch her because I'm at work during the day. I know it's expensive, but I have my own grandchildren I help with, so I can't offer any financial help either. Friend's mom: if she can't get daycare, she will lose her job, and that's just going to make things worse. Mom: I'm gonna have to call you back. I'm still half asleep, so this conversation is too much for my brain right now. Friend's mom: okay, well, call me back so I can let granddaughter's mom know what we came up with. Mom hangs up and immediately blocks the number and waits to call me at a decent time to share the conversation. Edited to add, I apologize if it wasn't made clear that this happened a long time ago. I only remembered it when the granddaughter in this post recently shared a birth announcement on FB. Unlike the Reddit sagas where someone goes off the deep end or to jail, it was rather anticlimactic. More background. At that time, while not wealthy, my mom owned a decently successful business. The friend's mom was on disability and living in a fixed-income place that had assigned roommates and didn't allow children. After speaking to my mom, I called my sister to ask where her friend's mom got the nerve to try to strong-arm our mom. My sister said not to respond or call her back, and that would be enough of an answer. For a few months, the friends avoided coming to our house and were short if we saw them somewhere, but things eventually died down. The next one is an entitled people story. Our pool at the hotel I work for have hours from 8 a.m. to dusk. However, unofficially, we keep the pool open until 10 p.m. because many youth travel teams stay there. We have reasons for the 10 p.m. closing time that include housekeeping cleaning up for the next day, pool chemicals needed to treat the water, and noise complaints. The pool is right under some of the hotel rooms. Out of respect, I always give 3 notices the pool will be closing soon, 9 p.m., 9:40 p.m. to 9:55 p.m. I do this not to shock everyone at 10 p.m. It's always an issue getting the kids and drunk parents out of the pool, but giving them the notices usually works. This particular night starts off as normal. Everyone is idioting and moaning that the pool is closed, but they leave and I lock the gates. About 5 minutes later, this entitled Karen comes over to me and demands the pool stays open for another hour. She says her group pays good money here, and her kids are upset the pool closed so early. I explain the reasons I stated above, and then Karen loses her mind. Of course, the first thing she says is, I want to see something official that states the pool hours. At this point, I'm just going to screw with her fragile emotions and take her over to the pool hours sign. I say, we know during the summer kids like to stay in the pool later, so instead of closing at dusk, we keep the pool open until 10 p.m. She gets all fired up and says, it doesn't say 10 p.m., it says dusk. I'm going to make her look stupid. I've had enough. I say, in most parts of the USA, depending on the time of year, dusk can be approximately between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. It's past 10 p.m. now, so you got a bonus hour because it's past 10 p.m. She says she knows what dusk is and storms off. There is a plot twist. Karen goes into the hotel and applies so much pressure on the front desk, they ask me to open the pool for another hour. I respectfully say, "The gates are locked, and this is what I have been instructed to do. However, if you decide to unlock the gate, that would be your decision, and I have nothing to do with it. I have no hard feelings, I always cover my ass." The FD took the responsibility of opening the pool back up, and entitled Karen got her way. Anyway, thank you for watching.